Hello and welcome to my impressions of Dreamscaper. I have a certain amount of footage here, so I'm just going to kind of freestyle for a while, hitting on certain points, and yeah, give you my take on the game. I've spent roughly 6-7 hours with it, I think, at this point. I haven't moved past the second dungeon, but real quick, just some backstory here. This is made by a brand new game studio called Afterburner Studios, I think. Made up of a few devs who previously worked for a different studio, decided to leave and start their own thing, and one of their first ideas evolved into what could become a really cool game, and they just did their release of version 1.0 here called Dreamscaper. It's been in early access for a while on Steam, and the people who have reviewed it on Steam have generally had some very positive things to say about the experience and following along with development and certain tweaks that they've made. That and a trailer was enough to get me interested. I got it on like the release week sale, so it was a little bit less than usual. I think at full price on the Switch it's $25, but even at that price point you do set certain expectations of quality, you know, especially for an indie when there are plenty of great titles for 15 or 20 bucks full price. Immediately you're thinking, okay, this is going to be pretty good. Overall, my most general impressions that I can give, it has been a positive experience with a lot of neat ideas and some solid execution, but also a few questionable choices here and there that have dragged down the experience a bit. So the premise of the game itself is that you have a young woman who experiences all the combat of the game in her dream state. She's a lucid dreamer, and this is where she dukes it out with sort of negative forces in her mind. I think the first boss is just fear, so not that unexpected for another video game that's set in someone's brain. And then when she wakes up, that's when she talks with people in the real world and travels around the city and levels up her skills for future runs. I do want to mention too on the premise that, yeah, I know it's maybe on the surface it's not the most original thing, because we have had a number of games set in someone's mind in some way. This gives the devs a means of discussing more abstract or psychologically based topics, right? It's not the first game to do that kind of thing. I still really enjoyed the general premise. I enjoyed the sort of switch between the gameplay and then doing things in the real world, and more than anything else, I enjoyed that the premise facilitates this really beautiful art direction, and these environments in the dungeons especially are lovely, and it feels like they are almost one-to-one to what the concept art for this game must have been. I haven't seen the concept art, but I have to assume this is just what they had intended, and that they translated it really well into the working game. This is something I've maybe touched on before, where there are certain genres of games that I love, but for whatever reason those genres tend to stick to certain aesthetics and art styles and color palettes. Like, you know, first-person shooters tend to be really bloody and red and brown and black, and there's hell and demons a lot of the time, and just violence and crazy stuff. Or a lot of roguelikes even, that are just like, here's a dungeon or a sewer or a big castle, sort of traditional fantasy stuff, very traditional video game settings. But the ones that break away, games that fall into these genres but use a completely different visual style and a completely different premise, immediately have my attention. Going Under is a huge one to mention on that front, and of course now Dreamscaper. It's a roguelike that's not in hell, it's not all ugly environments or kind of depressing in-game worlds. It's basically real life and then a very stylized dream version of things. And even though dungeons are tense because of the gameplay, I still really enjoyed brawling through them. You know, I enjoyed getting to look around and see how certain things were designed in this world, and to ultimately make sense that none of the geography really has a ton of logic because it's a dream thing, right? It's just all scrambled around. It fits really well into the randomized or procedurally generated levels of roguelikes that are just so popular right now. What else? The camera. The game's camera never really felt great to me. You do have a few different options in terms of zoom, but for me, I either felt too detached from the action or I felt so close that I couldn't see what else was coming around. It's not the standard view you'll see in a lot of roguelites or 2D roguelikes and things like that, where it's either isometric or more or less top-down. This is, yeah, kind of at a weird angle. You can technically see everything that's going on, but I do think depth perception becomes a bit of an issue at times for me. And I also think that the camera somehow, as well as maybe sound work and some other aspects of combat, they kind of brought down the combat experience for me. It never felt quite as impactful. It kind of felt like it should. Like, I really want combat to feel solid and satisfying in a game like this, and it didn't quite get there for me. It was definitely a choice to make certain sounds and actions in the dream world kind of floaty. You have this mist stuff going around. Here's how the bombs go off. It fits the game world. Yeah, it's dreamlike and gentle, but at the same time, like, I want it to be kind of loud and crazy, or I want it to feel very impactful. So that was maybe a little bit of friction for me, where the art style and the actual gameplay feedback kind of collided. Being a roguelite, I always have to slow down to say that, because roguelite and roguelike, neither is great, is it? No one played Rogue. Something that comes along with that genre is a pretty solid loop and sense of progression. In Dreamscaper as well, I did have a pretty good feeling of progression and getting stronger, and that is baked into the roguelite experience to some degree, I think. But here, it has been executed very well. There's a lot of stuff you can change too. If you really want to tweak your experience with the game and the combat and the core mechanics, you can really mess around with customizing your character in terms of their skills, in terms of friendships with other people, which give you boosts in the dungeons, the different weapons you select, your magic abilities, which are called lucid attacks. In fact, after a while, you unlock essentially like a difficulty customizer for your runs that give you like 4 or 5 different aspects of each run that you would like to either make more difficult or leave at sort of the standard difficulty. You have a tick box for like what seems to be a general easy mode of giving your character more health and lucid. They give you so many different ways to not change how things work, but change your experience with the core mechanics. And I always appreciate that. I think more options is almost always better. I've said so many good things about the game. My overall experience has been very positive. I just wanted to repeat that because I now want to say a few critical things about the game's storytelling and characters, because I'm not as on board with that stuff. I definitely respect the type of story that the game is trying to tell. It's very much about encouraging positivity and healthy lifestyle habits and being an active member of the community and being open to other people out in the world and being like a kinder person overall. All this really good stuff that I am completely in support of, and I think it fits the game entirely. But in terms of execution, we either get that stuff delivered through like the specific names of upgrades in the real world will all be like positivity related or related to relationships with other people in the real world, or you get it delivered through dialogue with other characters. There's no voice acting, which is fine, but I think in this case, it was not long before different characters started to feel very similar to me, and they all felt very similar to the lead character as well, I think, just because not a lot of them have a ton of voice in the sense of style. The style of the dialogue doesn't shift really to give the impression of different personalities, I guess. Overall, the dialogue didn't feel very naturalistic to me, and some of the conversations could go on for quite a while. You can skip them or hop out of them. It didn't really work. And again, I know it all ties into this concept, and it's all like it's a tale of self-improvement in a way, and doing very real things that you can do in your actual life to make yourself a better person and to be kinder to other actual humans. I'm happy it's here, but some of the execution stuff on that front just didn't work too well for me. And in fact, I think it kind of falls into a trope. It's sort of a trope that I've started to identify between a lot of contemporary indie titles where, I don't know, I call it the wholesome millennial narrative. Maybe from the title you can get a sense of what that translates to in different games. And I'd like to talk about it in great detail some other time, but for the moment I'll just say I wasn't super motivated to engage with other characters and talk to them outside of wanting to get benefits, like outside of wanting to get perks in the dungeons, which was maybe not the intention. Like I said, generally a pretty positive experience. I don't know whether they have plans to continue tweaking stuff or add features or change things around. Even if they didn't, I would feel fine with the purchase. I don't know whether I'll ever really sit down and finish the entire thing and see the story through to its conclusion. But even so, yeah, I'm very happy with it. In any case like this, where there's so much you like about it, it also leads to consideration of how it could have been even better. And I think that was the big thing for me, was there are just a few areas where it's not immediately my new favorite game. Not the worst thing in the world, of course, it's not really a sin, but I did see some other opportunities there for things that would at least make it better for me. But that's about it. Thank you so much for joining me. There's also a pretty great article I found that just seems to be the devs talking about the history of the game, which I will link in the description if I can find it. Thanks for stopping by.